since it's the start, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and where people can find you, and any links you'd like to shout out?
Well, I'm Max. I'm just a Twitter person, really. I'm not even a Twitter person. I just use Twitter for fun. My tag is at himyawi1, right? And I would like to promote my boyfriend's GoFundMe. He's at KyotoBoyRo on Twitter. Um, he's a trans mask living in an abusive environment, and he needs funds for his transition. That's all.
Great links. Posted those in chat for anyone who's interested. Um, so, why don't you? What are like the fundamental topics you'd like to talk about, and why don't you advance what you think your position on those is?
I think my position is that there is a falling rate of profit, that the
Mm-hmm.
falling rate of profit should.
Hello.
Sorry, I got interrupted. I
No
think there
worries.
is a falling rate of profit that the rate of profit should not be interpreted as having a monocause, that it has many causes, that that the rate that Marx's law of value is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all.
Sure. I mean,
That's
so
what I think.
So on the falling rate of profit one, this one is interesting because I think that in mainstream economics, there's a related thesis about whether there's secular stagnation of like the regular rates of growth or regular economic growth, but it doesn't come from a Marxian perspective. So like, let's say that the Marxian rate of profit is falling. What predictions would we make from that? That would be like, I guess in short, let's say the rate of profit is falling. What happens as a result?
Well, I can tell you what will happen as a result. Just let me collect my thoughts for 1 minute. Well,
Sure.
I want to explain this in relation to like the 2008 financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
In general, what happens when if we were to interpret the capitalist as a rational person who is representing the interest of a social relation that we come to know as capital, then it would make sense for them to maximize profit.
Mm-hmm.
And when when we have a rate of profit that is low, therefore the accumulation of capital is stagnant. It's slow. It's not, and so the capitalist will look for other ways to find profit, right? And so this is why Marx follows after the chapters on the rate of profit, he follows with chapters on fictitious capital, because this is the what will happen is that you will invest in fictitious capital such as stocks, stuff that does not really have any relation to value, but it gives the illusion that they are making a profit. In the end, what will happen is that you will have a credit bubble that can never represent value, because the rate of profit can never catch up with it, since that is ever growing and the rate of profit is ever falling. Hence, you will have a crisis like the one in 2008.
Sure. I mean, so the basic question then is if the falling rate of profit leads to a collapse of like accumulation of capital, we should see said collapse of the accumulation of capital, right?
Well, it does not lead to collapse, it leads to
Well,
crisis.
well, sure. So like as the rate of profit falls, presumably we'd see less and less capital accumulation, right? Because it's less and less profitable.
Yes, yes.
So the problem is that, as far as I'm aware, we haven't actually observed that. Like the rate of investment in the U.S. economy has been roughly 15% of GDP for give or take 100 years. Even
Well,
as
GDP is not really the a metric for measuring value or a metric for measuring the amount of wealth in society. GDP is a metric of national development, so you should
well,
not
yeah,
really
it's
measure
it's a
value in
metric of
accordance
national
to it.
income, right? And so of national
No,
income,
it's
about
a metric
15% has been
national
dedicated to
development that
investment.
includes. Well, it does not matter if 50% has been dedicated to the investment. What I'm talking about is not really just the profit of like a single individual capitalist class in the US, but the capitalist class as a whole.
Well, yeah, so like, is the suggestion that like the United States is investing, but other countries are stopping investing? What's the idea there? Because overall investment rates worldwide have generally, if anything, gone up over time.
Well, do investment rates show that the rate of profit isn't falling? Well, of
If
course, investment rates will keep increasing because that's the nature of capital. If there is no investment, there is no economy.
Well, yes, but as you said, if we believe capitalists to be rational individuals, then as the rate of profit falls, investment should fall. And we haven't observed like huge amount of reduction of investment.
Well, no capitalist will just shoot himself in the head. They will try and try again to make profit.
So they aren't rational?
Well, they
Right?
are rational, but they are restricted by the social relations and by the restrictions of the economy that they live in. They
Sure.
should try and invest to make a profit in the end.
Hello, hello. So like they want to invest to make a profit, but I'm saying that if investment, if like, so like a metric is like gross fixed capital formation, which is like how much people are spending on building new shit, new factories. And if anything, again, that seems to be going up over time. That's like the thing that degrowthers hate on, is that we have actually been doing that. But if the rate of profit has been falling, it seems that that would not be occurring. So your suggestion that they're simply investing to try and get a rate
No,
of profit
why would
doesn't
it
really
be
hold, because then
occurring?
they
I
would
don't
just invest in
see
something else.
the correlation between, like, first of all, I want to make things clear, but let me find the quote I'm trying to that I'm trying to think of here. Just 1 second. Um, um, 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Marx says that the law of a progressive fall in the rate of profit in no way prevents the mass of labor set in motion and exploited by social capital from growing. This is really consistent with Marx's theory. Marx's theory does not predict that somehow capitalists will stop investing, that somehow that the mass that as he says the absolute mass of labor set in motion and exploited by the social capital from growing. Marx predicts that it will keep growing, but
Okay.
however that the return on investment will keep getting lower.
So if this is true, then it sounds like the consequence of the falling of the rate of profit isn't true. That it's not true that it will lead to a decline of investment.
Well, I've never said that the consequence of the rate of profit that it will lead to decline in investment. I said that it will lead to crisis because they will invest in fictitious capital.
Sure. So then that's another interesting one. If we both agree that the rate
Well,
of
the
profit,
thing is, you're interpreting the rate of profit as something that is monocausal, that it either leads to less investment or that's it. But the rate of profit has hundreds of implications. For one, if you think, for example,
sure,
about the
and we can test all of them.
if you think, for example, about the counteracting tendencies for the rate of profit, you find other problems too. You find that the counteracting tendencies tend to, how do you increase the rate of profit overall? Well, you can either do this by, increasing the intensity of exploitation, or cheapening the price of labor power, or, opening new markets, etc. All of these have had consequences that we saw in the neoliberal
Sure.
boom,
So
in which countries outsourced so that they can get, cheap labor, cheap constant capital, and an increase in the intensity of exploitation. That's another consequence of the falling rate of profit. The
okay,
falling rate
sure.
of
So
profit
no, that's
does
not
not
no, no,
have
no,
a
that's not a
monocausality.
consequence. No,
That's
no, no,
a
no, no,
false
no, no, no,
idea.
no, no. That's on the cause side. So I'm not. Do we agree? So all you're suggesting is what Marx called like the counter. Now I'm totally forgetting the name. The things which can increase the rate of
Counteracting
profit.
tendencies.
Sure, the counteracting tendencies, those can increase the rate of profit. But we don't actually disagree that the rate of profit has fallen, right? Over time, we agree that the rate of profit has fallen.
What I was trying to say, and you ignored for no reason, is that the rate of profit does not have a monocause.
But I'm
It
not
has
saying that
many
it does.
causes
I'm
and
simply
many
saying that it
effects.
has been
So,
falling, right?
yes, it has been falling.
Okay, so then if the overall rate of profit has been falling, then
But
we don't need
the
to
thing is,
disagree about
it's
the
a
causes.
tendency.
Whatever its causes
Listen to me,
are,
please.
we. Okay.
It's a tendency, and for example, in the 1970s, it was not falling; it was increasing. Why? Because we had a thing called the neoliberal boom, right? In which what I described earlier happened. Outsourcing happened because capitalists tried to do the counteracting measures of increasing exploitation, etc., etc.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's say that there was a short-term increase of the rate of profit, right? If the
Yes.
overall trend is in the long term sharply negative, in general, you would
Yeah.
expect the consequences of the rate of profit to still show up. Even if sometimes rate of profit goes up, most of the time it's going down, right?
Well, the thing is, you say
Otherwise, it ain't
consequence,
falling.
and I just explained that the rate of profit has many consequences, not one.
Yes, and what I was suggesting is we can test them. One of those consequences is investment. And I can just show the graph on
No, one of
screen, but
these
I can.
consequences has never been investment. I want to
Sure. So
quote
the other
Marx
one
in
was
this.
crises, right? So you mentioned crises. We can talk about that. The rate of crisis has also been declining over time. It might not seem
That's
like
not
it, but
true.
economic
That's not true
crises
at
are
all.
smaller and smaller over time.
In the 1960s, there has been one crisis. In the 2000s, there have been two. One called the dot-com boom, and the other was the
Do
2008
you think
crisis.
that it is a proper analysis to look at like one crisis in the 60s versus like two, or do you think it's proper to look at like the scope of the
The thing
crises
is,
over
this
time
makes
and
no
how many
sense.
they're
I
like?
mean, in the
We can do
70s,
formal
there has been
analysis
two.
on this.
There is no actual evidence that crisis has been happening less. Quite the
Okay,
contrary.
can you Google something for me? Just Google the
Go
Great
ahead.
Moderation.
What?
This is the Great. It's called the Great Moderation. This is something that like virtually everyone, as far as I can tell, seems to agree that happened. There was a decline of the rate of recessions of crises between like the 1970s or so and like the 1990s, 2000s or so. And the only question is whether it has continued.
The neoliberal boom, which I just explained and you ignored.
No, this was before the neoliberal boom. Neoliberals is the 1980s.
You said in the 1970s to the 1990s.
Yeah, like
Okay,
1960s,
the
1970s,
neoliberal boom
1990s.
happened in 1971.
I,
You can see the rate of profit for yourself.
okay, sure. So if your claim is that
Okay.
the rate of profit went up, then actually the rate of crisis should go down. So by your claim, if then during the neoliberal period the rate of profit went up, we should have seen less crises, but we actually saw more. The Great
Well,
Recession.
the thing is, I have never
What?
said that the rate of profit is the only source of crisis. There are
Okay.
other sources of crisis. There is, for example, problems in the circulation of capital, where there is hoarding, and so what happens is since no one can since there is a long interval between purchasing and selling, there can happen crisis, and Marx describes this.
Sure. So this would be a problem if capitalists were having problems selling their stuff. This would be like overaccumulation.
Well, I'm just telling you an example of another crisis. Like
Yes.
there are plenty
But
of
we would
crises
assume-
in
we would
capitalism
ass-
that has nothing to do with the rate of profit.
So the thing that we would assume, if it is true,
Yes.
that if these crises are caused by other problems in capitalism, and we assume those other problems in capitalism are roughly
Well,
constant
of course,
over
they are
time.
caused by other problems in capitalism. What are they caused
Be-
by? From the sky?
Okay, I don't know. You didn't need to interrupt to say that. So if they're
Okay.
caused by other things in capitalism, and those things are roughly constant over time, then the like difference that we'd see in rates of crisis over time would be due to, according to this, at least in large part, the rate of profit. Right?
Well, not necessarily. I don't really know where you're driving these laws from when nobody has claimed this.
Okay. So let's do it like this. We're supposed to be, like economics is supposed to be a science. Marxism is supposed to be a science. What testable predictions could you make about the falling rate of profit that we could either try to use to prove it true or false?
What testable? Well, it exists. It's falling, and it caused the crisis.
Okay, it's falling, but we actually care about the predictions of the theory. So it's falling, and therefore something happens. Right?
Right.
Okay.
And the fall has implications that has led to
Okay,
for
what
example,
implications?
.com boom. Well,
Okay, so then if
I
it's
described
crisis,
two.
we can measure
One of them
crisis.
is the investment in fictitious capital, which caused the problem in the 2008 crisis, which people like Andrew Kleiman described in The Failure of Capitalist Production and others. Many have described this phenomena resulting from the falling rate of profit. And Marx says directly, following this, that, hang on, let me please find the quote, if you are generous enough for that.
Sorry, what?
Please let me, I'm looking for a quote. Okay, can you let me find it?
I don't know why there's so
It
many
says
people
the
in chat who
chain
seem
of
to be
payment
rejecting scientific
Marx
realism.
says
What the
the
fuck?
chain of payment obligations at specific dates broken in 100 places, and there is still further intensified by an accompanying breakdown of the credit system which had developed alongside capital. All this therefore leads to violent and acute crisis, sudden forcible devaluations, and an actual stagnation and disruption in the reproduction process, and hence an actual decline in reproduction. He says this in page number 320 in volume 3. This is a direct prediction of a crisis that results from fictitious capital, which we have seen in history.
Okay, so if the claim is that now capitalists aren't investing in like real increases of production, they're just investing in financial capital, right? This is something that we could
In
observe.
fictitious capital, not financial capital.
Okay, when he says fictitious capital, what do you think he means by fictitious capital? Because I can tell you,
Capital
having
that
read
has
Kleeman,
no relation to value.
okay, it has no relation to value, and therefore it is what kind of investment? Is it investment in real stuff like firms, or is it investment in something else? What could that something else be?
Well, whatever, it's not really that important.
It's financial. It's finances. That's it. And
Well,
so,
okay, I guess
if they're
we'll call
investing
it
in financial stuff, then they aren't investing in real stuff. We could observe this.
Yeah, sure.
but we don't. Like there is an increasing financialization. Some argue, right? But it doesn't seem like that has led to like a
This is
decrease.
observable. There has been an increase in in this department of investment.
Sure. So
Massively so.
we see increasing investment in financial stuff, right? But we also see investment in real stuff over time, all the time. It's like,
Well, this is not contradictory to me, as I quoted Marx literally saying that there will continue to be a growing productive capital where surplus labor is extracted. So this is just consistent with what I'm saying.
so when I tried to ask for like predictions that this theory would make, the prediction is like that it would lead to increased crises, that it would lead to investment in the certain kinds of like assets, right? And so we can measure the decrease in crises.
There is an increase of that, and it led to a crisis. So there is your prediction.
But it didn't lead to crisis. There's been a decline of the rate of crises over time. I can send you a study on this. There's literally metrics of volatility of growth over time, and they have declined. Growth volatility today is lower than it's ever been, at least in measured history.
Can you please define this concept?
Sure.
Of volatility?
Like, if you went up, basically it's trying to measure the difference between the rate of growth in like year X and year X plus 1. And so in general, the difference between growth in year X and X plus 1 has declined.
What does growth mean? It's such a broad category, like growth in what?
Literally here, it could mean growth in an individual economic sector. Like,
well, first of all, I remember the study you cited in growth volatility, and I remember it being constant, not smaller.
No, like it very clearly declined. I can just show the graphs.
Well, no. For example, in the UK, it has been like constant for I don't know, like about 10 years. In the United States, it's constant for 10 years. In Canada, I mean, it's decreasing overall. There's a trend for it to decrease, I guess. You can say that.
Sure.
But in Japan, for example, it's actually like has increased.
So in some countries, it increased. But overall, most of the countries saw a decline.
In France, it seems to be stagnant since like forever. I have seen your graphs.
Yes, and so but in like, 3 countries, really Germany, France, and Italy, it was flat.
When out of 5 countries, 2 of them are stagnant and 1 is increasing, this is not really a good metric at all.
So this study looked at the G7 countries. Out of the sample of 7 countries, 3 were flat, 3 went down, and 1 went up. So if the claim is that the falling rate of profit
is really like you're just saying
no, because
half all of them were not consistent with what I'm saying. This is really bad.
No, it's not more than half. It's 6 out of 7. Because if the rate of profit is falling, volatility should go up, according to the theory that it's increasing crises. But instead, it is flat or declining.
Volatility and crisis, to be honest.
Okay, then. Okay.
Well, okay. How about this? How about I turn your method into you? If volatility is really related to crisis, why did we see more crisis in the 2000s than in the 60s?
Because simply looking at a binary variable will sometimes, like by the very nature of large numbers, get you more occurring in a given time period, rather than looking at the overall trend over time. If you look,
there have not been many global economic crises, so what you're saying cannot be tested. Like I do not believe the link between them, and you cannot prove it really.
Okay, so we can easily prove this. This is the whole point of the Great Moderation. This is the whole point of measuring this volatility stuff. We can literally measure the rate of recessions over time.
Oh my god, this economic stuff, really, I don't buy it at all. Like in economics, they don't
do you oppose it? Let's just put it to you like this. Do you impose empirics in trying to form how you think the economy works?
Not necessarily, but yeah.
Okay, then what makes you different? So let's say that like an Austrian starts from prior principles about how the economy works, and you start from prior principles about how the economy works. How do we know who's right and who's wrong? How do we know whose prior principles win?
Is wrong because they make logical mistakes, really.
Okay, they make logical mistakes. So how would we know?
Yes.
Like, let's do it like this. Which logical mistake do they make?
Well, first of all, they assume an ideal abstraction to actually explain exchange ratio. So
they assume an ideal abstraction.
All the way back to this goes all the way back to Bombauric's example of like a farm, and like the farm gets out his preference scales and measure it with another person. But this is all like an ideal abstraction. This is not how the real world works at all. If we actually go to the real world, we will find that no.
But you can't go to the real world because you oppose empirical evidence. You can't look at the real world. You're just starting with a vision of how the world works and then working forward from that.
This is just very simple observation. In the real world, we don't have preference scales. In the real world, prices are already predetermined, which is a problem for Austrians.
Both of those are
preference scales. Please listen to me. If preference scales are an explanation for prices, then how come prices are already predetermined when you go to the market? So you end up in a circular logic. Are prices the reflection of my preference scales, or my preference scales are the explanation of price? It makes no sense.
Okay, so in Austrian economic theory, an individual will have no impact on prices, but overall preferences will. This is not even a logical contradiction. This is
Yes,
such a bad
I know,
example.
but like the way
I was
they
gonna.
arrived at this was
What?
from like an ideal abstraction, which
I think
made
I've
no
let you
logical
speak for
sense.
like 90% of this chat. Why? Why can't you like let me speak ever? I don't get it. So
Go ahead, take your time.
Sure. So when like Marx makes an abstraction that apparently the capitalists always want to like always try to pursue profit, but then you say that also capitalists will always do these investments which don't make any money. How are we to believe which abstraction is true? Like, how do you know
Well, if
which
you don't
model is
make this
correct?
well, the thing is, you fundamentally misunderstand the falling rate of profit. The point of the falling rate of profit is that at the beginning, can I explain, or will you have a problem with that? In the beginning,
Sure.
a capitalist invests in a machine that cuts down like labor time, and so you end up, for example, let's say it cuts labor time by half. So you end up producing double for the same production cost, and your competitors don't have this innovation yet. And so when you sell it, you can sell it just below the social average time, the social average price, and so
Mm-hmm.
you end up making a profit, right? Because your cost of production is way less than the social average time, than the slightly less social average time. You end up outcompeting people and making a profit. However, innovation cannot be hidden forever, and so other capitalists can do that. The reason capitalists do these irrational decisions are because they forced to. If they don't do that, their competitors will, and
Okay.
they will be outcompeted.
So this is a great model. How do we know that this model works in reality? The Austrians have a model too. How do we know that their model is wrong and yours is right?
Because mine is logically consistent,
Okay,
and there is really,
but it isn't.
if you understand
Theirs is just as consistent
if you
as yours.
understand capital as a circuit that tends to expand itself, then the people who
How
represent
do you know that
capital
it tends to
will,
do that? How do you know that this model applies to the
that's
world?
very easy. That's very easy. That's actually like literally uh, logically self-evident.
Okay,
Capital
logically
is buying
self-evident.
for,
How
okay,
does that? The
no,
Austrian
please,
says that it's
please,
logically self-evident.
okay.
How does that make your claim any different? Why can't you just use empirical evidence to try and prove laws?
Well,
The whole point of like Scheich and
if
Kleeman
it's
is they do
logically
try to use empirical
self-evident, I
evidence.
don't really
God damn
need
it.
empirical proof, my dear.
Okay, because logical self-evidence is a cop-out that people use to avoid having to prove that their theories
That's
actually
not
work about the
true.
real
If
world.
you let me explain, you would see how it's
I
logically
listened
self-evident.
to it. I read Marx. I have read all of the Kleeman theories.
You
I
have
understand
never
the
read
idea.
Marx in your life. In your website, you say Marx is a supply side theorist. Like this is just proof that you have never read Marx.
Yeah, I've
Marx
never read
places
Marx.
such
Really good
big-
point. Really good point. I have like, what, 40, 50 quotes from Marx. I've never read Das Kapital, not once in my life. I've never read any of the related literature, not once. Really strong argument. Can you actually try to argue for your theory instead of arguing against me? I'm saying, how do you know that your model actually applies to the world if you have no way to link the model's predictions and the actual things that we see in the world? Where?
Well, because it's self-evident.
How?
It's
Okay, self-evident is not an
you never
answer.
let me explain how capital is self-evident for you to go in this huge.
I did. You told us about
tell me that I'm
accumulation.
just-
You told us about profit and like about technology. You explained the logic.
Yes,
Now that
but
we've
you
got a
never
model,
let me
how do we know
talk
that the model
about
works?
capital.
Okay, so
Okay.
you weren't talking about capital before,
The
but
thing
now you're
with
talking about capital.
is that it's literally just buying for selling, right? I buy a commodity and then I sell it for more than it's worth. Is this
Okay.
correct? It's literally very self-evident. Is
Let's
this
say
correct?
Sure.
Right? The thing with capital is that in the end I get more money than I originally made. Correct? Or else the circuit itself will be redundant. If
Yeah.
you made money and on the other hand you made money again, which is of the same value, then this is just a redundancy. So you always must make more money.
This is the same model the Austrians
else
use.
you
Can you
just-
please try to explain this getting to a conclusion?
Well, I just explained how the capitalist will always have to chase after profit because or else they're just doing a redundant act.
What?
I explained why a capitalist will always chase towards a profit because else they will do a redundant thing.
Okay. Great. Again, this is a model. You're trying to explain how this
is
model
not a
applies to the
model.
world.
This is just a logical conclusion built from very
This is what the
strong
Austrians say.
observations.
This is what the I had a debate with an Austrian PhD who said the same damn thing, that, hey, all of these models are actually not models. They're just logical derivations of the fact that people pursue profit. Individuals pursue profit. Okay? So merely saying this doesn't actually enable you to know which model is true.
You're just like a vulgar empiricist. No one holds this view in the world.
Wait, this isn't like, vulgar empiricism. You first derive a model and then you test its predictions, but you are not allowing me to test your predictions. Every time I try to test it, you just retreat back and pivot to something else.
You hold some outdated epistemology by Karl Popper, which no.
That's actually really interesting. No. You think that I believe in Karl Popper? Can you describe what Karl Popper's like philosophy is, real quick?
Well, his whole thing is falsibility.
Okay.
Right.
Great. So it's a good thing that I'm not a Popperian.
The standard is infallibility, not falsibility.
That's actually a really good point. So since you don't like Popper, what empirical model do you use instead?
Well, I told you, infallibility, not falsibility.
Okay, how would you know that something is infallible? What's the metric to determine that?
Well, if I describe a general tendency and it turns out to be true, then that means that...
How would you know if it turns out to be true?
It's proven to be true.
No, tell me how it turns out to be true. How do you verify that?
Well, by looking at the data.
Oh, so you do have to look at the data.
Well, sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't.
Sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't. How do you know? How do you know when you need to look at the data?
Well, if something is as evident as 1 + 1 is equal to 2, or as that capital needs to make more money, then I really don't need to look at the data to know this. Like, do you actually need to look at the data to know that a commodity has a use value and a value? Are you kidding me, man?
So the Austrians will also say the exact same thing, that in mathematics,
the Austrians
you can
will never say this.
I literally can get a quote from the Austrians saying virtually the same thing.
Critiques, by the way, you know?
Okay, I can get a quote from an Austrian saying that, hey, we can use math to prove the, the a squared plus b squared equals c squared theorem. They can use math to prove that. Why would the economy be any different? The simple answer is that the economy includes hundreds of thousands of variables, and thinking that your model perfectly captures all of them is almost certainly incorrect. Why would you believe that your model is perfect without testing it?
We have never claimed to actually be economists or trying to capture the economy.
Then what are you capturing?
Critique of political economy.
Oh my god. Okay, then
we're taking specific parts of the economy that we see as infallible and leading to their own self-negation and talking about them. We don't try to capture the economy like the Austrians.
Great. So then, if you agree that you're not actually modeling the economy, why should I care about any of your predictions? If you're just modeling some sort of thing in your head about how you think the economy works, and its predictions only apply to the thing in your head, why do I care about your predictions about the actual economy?
Abstractions, and his method is called real abstractions. It does not start at a farm where people exchange with reference scales. It starts at the production process. It starts with a simple commodity.
Okay.
Does not have his method.
All you're trying to say here is that the model is good. Literally, all you're trying to say is that the model is good and based on good foundations. So we can only know if the foundations are good and lead to good conclusions by testing. That's the whole point. You were just agreeing with this. That you said that sometimes you need to test things. Actually, so let's say I have a model about how crime works, about why people do crime. And I have some model that people do crime because, that they steal things because, I don't know, they are deviants and they like to hurt others. And this model is perfectly it's perfectly internally consistent. How do we know this model is true or false?
Well, first of all, your model has nothing to do with logic or logical proof. So you either since you
okay, let's do a logical proof. Premise one, people.
Empiricism.
Sure, let's do a logical proof. Premise one, criminals like to hurt people. Premise two, crime hurts people. Premise three, therefore criminals will do crime because it hurts people. Done. We've done logical proof. Now, how do we know whether this model actually works?
Well, no, actually, your argument was not logically coherent. It was not logically valid.
Sure. What internal contradiction occurred in my syllogism?
The premises at all.
Okay.
Your premises implied something, and the conclusion implied intention. Please, you don't even know how to do basic logical argumentation.
I literally did X is Y, Y is Z, therefore X is Z. How much more basic can you get?
No. Your conclusion implied intention, and none of the premises did. Okay. Do you see your mistake now?
Okay, great. So that's a really good argument. Maybe some models are wrong even on their own, and we can discount those models. What about models that are internally consistent? Because you are aware that it's possible to develop infinitely many possible internally consistent models, correct?
Yes, but they are not.
So how do we know which one is true?
Liberal. I love you.
Well, the thing is, if your model, you don't really need to go deep into empirical proof to know that something is true. Like, for example, if I say Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. I don't really need to go to the empirical proof of,
great, because those are simply applying definitions.
Seems like some very basic observation, and Marx just makes these. He makes a very basic observation that a commodity is a use value and a value. Yeah, and from this point, he builds a whole critique of political economy from
Okay,
very basic observations. I don't really need to show a graph. Like a graph isn't like the model of ultimate proof, you know?
okay. So I understand that you say that you start with simple observations. So too does the Austrian. Your only claim against them is that they are
That's not
internally
true.
inconsistent.
As I told you,
I,
I've read Bombaurik, and what they start with is not an observation, but an example.
okay, why do you keep
An
referring to
example
this
that
one
they made in
Austrian?
their head.
I could refer to a dozen other Austrians.
Bombaurik.
Actually, why do you
Well,
keep doing this one guy? There's literally like hundreds of Austrians. So
well,
others
Bombaurik
don't
is
start
a
on a fucking farm.
foundational marginal utility and Austrian. Like, you cannot discard Bombaurik, you know? It's like discarding Marx and saying you can do Marxian economics.
Okay,
It makes no sense.
so that would apply if I was referring to like the founders of Austrian economics, but not. This is not that guy.
Bombaurik is one of them.
Wake up, liberal.
Oh my
I
god.
love you.
So
Yeah.
we could just do another one. We could do like say Rothbard. Rothbard says that you starts with a single simple observation that people will only trade when it provides
Yeah,
them a
he's
profit.
Dolan and Coben.
So do you disagree with the observation that people trade when they make profit, which is literally something you just said 3 minutes ago?
People trade when they make profit?
That people only trade when they can make profit. That's literally what you just said about capital.
Well, that's not true. Throughout history, people have traded for use value, not profit. There was simple commodity circulation, and now we're in capitalist circulation.
Can you please not try to semantically get out of this? Do you agree that people only trade when it
simple
benefits them?
commodity circulation is,
Can
for
you
example,
please not try to get out of this? Do people only
like,
trade when it benefits
a
them?
man makes weight and he exchanges it. Please listen to me. A man makes weight and he exchanges it for, like, I don't know, beer or whatever. This is
Why are you
simple
doing this
commodity
long?
circulation. It's not for profit. There is trade and there is no profit.
Okay, so I'm glad that now we get a chance to differentiate profit in like the colloquial and profit in like the more formal economic sense. So colloquially, profit just means something that benefits you. So you can do something in like your household that gives you profit. That's literally just how language works. I'm sorry that this is hard for you to like work. So instead of using the word profit, what if I said people only trade when it gives them greater use value? Would you then agree with that?
Yes, sure.
Okay, great. So they start with a simple observation that you agree with. How do we know that this model and everything they derive from it is wrong?
But they did not start with a simple observation they agree with. They said profit, not a greater use value.
Oh my god. Do you want me to get the actual quote from Rothbard? Because you're actually just trying to do a semantic argument now. You're literally not actually arguing against the model. You're just semantically arguing against it.
Refers to the fact that you sell something, and in the end you make more money than the money you started with. This has always been the definition of profit. There is no colloquial definition of profit. It means something that I got a use value back from. I can just say something is useful to me. No one says profit that way. You're just inventing things. You're playing the semantic game here.
Okay, so in the definition of profit on Google as a verb, the first is obtain a financial advantage. The second is obtain an advantage.
Right?
No, my God, why can't you let me stop? No, stop. You literally interrupted me while I was reading the second definition.
Okay, go ahead, finish.
Okay, so the first one is obtain a financial advantage. The second one is obtain an advantage, meaning any advantage. This is literally just what profit means. Usually it means financial, but in general it means any advantage. Why are you trying to get me on this semantic dumbass shit?
Like contradictory things. Like, if I say something in general, that means I say something is usually that way.
Okay.
Anyways, no problem.
So
No problem.
if the only critique you're having of like the Rothbard observation is that at first I used it using the word profit, and that in general you do agree with the observation that Rothbard starts with, then it sounds like you have no opposition to the fundamental observation of Rothbard's model, right?
Okay. I don't really understand how you don't see the implications of this. For one, the implications of this is that one thing the Austrians try to do is to show that capitalism is somehow universal.
But that's the things that they conclude from it. We're just talking about their model, right? Why are you talking about their conclusions? Talk about their model. Because you said I couldn't talk about your conclusions.
Model that they abstract away.
But you said I can't talk about the implications of your model when we can't test them empirically. So why are you talking about the implications of the Austrian model to disprove it? Talk about the model if you want to disprove the model, because apparently according to you, we reject Popper and we only refer to like a rationalist interpretation of these models. We only refer whether they're internally consistent or not. So why can't you just use the same damn logic?
Wake up, liberal. I love you.
No, I think this whole paragraph, this whole sentence was like a quote. Can you say it again?
Okay, so you say that I can't look at the conclusions of your model to test whether your model is true or false.
I said, when I talked about Austrians, I said implications, not conclusions. And implications means that, you know, that.
Are you really trying to semantically get out of implication versus conclusion? Is this really the road we're going?
Well, I was not really trying to say that, but okay, I'm going to like pretend that you have won this little disagreement because it does not matter to me that much, and I want to move this to somewhere productive. So please get to another point.
So the point here is that I'm trying to ask you why you think that models about human social behavior should be unempirical. And I'm trying to point to a contrast with the Austrian model, which also starts from, hey, we make this simple starting observation and we conclude absurd outcomes.
That we can use. Sure. Are you done? I said that they don't have to be necessarily empirical. If they satisfy necessary and sufficient conditions without empiricism, then that's fine.
Okay, so your necessary condition is what? What are the necessary conditions that a model doesn't need to get to empiricism? Like list out the conditions.
The premises are true, and the conclusion is, and the conclusion follows from them.
Okay, how would you know whether the premise is true without testing it?
Well, you don't really need to test it. Sometimes a premise is obvious from very basic observation.
Okay, so do you agree with the obvious premise that people only trade when it increases their use value?
Sure.
Okay, the Austrians will argue that all of their logic is internally valid and therefore their conclusions follow. So, are you an Austrian?
Well, they can claim that, but they're not. That's not correct.
Okay. So, this is interesting. So you say that there's a logical failure.
It's not correct. But let me ask you this. If in the end, actually, that value is determined by preference scales, if we put this back into the real world, and remove the ideal abstraction of a farm, when we exchange things...
Why do you keep talking about the goddamn farm? It's just about the simple observation of people making things for profit. Can you just engage with the strongman version?
If you actually read Bombaurik or actually any marginal utility, there is some example called subjectivist island, which is very popular and used for justification for almost all marginal utility and subjective value theory. This is why I keep bringing it up, because it's important for the theory. Okay? Anyways.
They don't need to use Robinson Crusoe to make the observation that people tend to make trades.
Crusoe, but okay.
The islands that you're talking about is called the Robinson Crusoe Island. That's the island. So the Robinson Crusoe Island is not necessary for them to make the observation that people tend to trade for things that give them more use value, which is something you yourself agree with.
Well, it's actually,
right?
Well, first of all, you contradict yourself between. First of all, you once said that they say that people trade for profit, and now you say the people trade for use value, which is, I mean, if you have read any Marx, you would know how different these two things are. Anyways, the reason I think that it's false is because, and of course I'm gonna ignore the fact that you use an ideal abstraction and just say directly that when we exchange things, we don't exchange for one commodity to another, and so this principle of utility does not utility and scarcity does not apply. Why? Because when we exchange for money, which does not have utility to anyone, right? And so how can you actually map out a preference scale of utility and and scarcity with commodity money? Like before, money used to be the gold standard, and so you actually need to have an exchange ratio between one thing and another without the other thing having any utility or scarcity.
Okay, so we live in a world with scarcity, right? Do you agree that we don't have infinite resources? Let's start in the... Okay, so premise 1, scarcity. Premise 2, people value things differently. Do you agree with this?
Yeah.
Okay, so the basic idea in Austrian economics is that if I have thing 1 and I value thing 1 less than thing 2, and another person has thing 2, then they will give them to each other, and then there has been an increase of use value. You don't need to bring money into this. The Austrians don't even start with money. Do you agree with this observation?
Well, yes, and this is
okay. Then you agree with the Austrian observation.
Start with money, or because we really don't exchange for one commodity to another. We exchange with the money commodity. The money commodity
is just a representation of value,
which it does not.
Money is literally just a representation of value. That's it. It's just something you use to use as a proxy for how much things value. That is literally how it operates.
Well, that doesn't make sense because the way you use it. I mean, if you read chapter 1 to 3. You need to actually establish, first of all, money before used to be the gold standard. It used to be a commodity, like any other commodities. And so there was an exchange ratio between one commodity and money.
Why can't you just talk about money? Why do you have to do the historical thing? So what does money represent now?
I didn't do the historical thing. If
you literally were talking about the gold standard.
Listen to my argument, and I feel like I'm talking, all of my arguments gets wasted on this because you never actually address them. You just keep making the same point.
You
about how
made
you need
empirical
empiricism
predictions
and
at the very
graphs.
start. You made empirical predictions. I showed that all of the empirical predictions you made were dumb or like irrelevant. They were false or irrelevant. And then because of that, we've gotten to this
You
dumb
never showed
conversation
that
about
they were
import.
false or irrelevant. You're just coping.
Sure, I showed that
Like-
volatility declined. I showed that rates of recession declined. I showed that like in general, all the predictions of like the rate of
Recession
profit.
did not decline. You just showed me a graph of volatility, and you never actually explained the link between volatility and.
Actually, this is a really interesting point. What
and-
do you think the fundamental difference between a recession and what is the difference between a recession and just a decline
No,
in growth?
please ask me questions that were already relevant to the conversation. Don't try to.
No.
like,
I just want you to
sneak
tell
your
me
way
real
out of
quick.
this.
What is the difference between like a minus 1% GDP growth versus 0 versus 1? What is the difference in name for these things?
I don't know, and I don't care.
Okay, so recession is the negative one, like stagnation is the 0% one, and then growth
Wow,
is the
you're
over
very
0.
smart. Can you go back to discussing the point, please?
So this is really simple. There is no fundamental difference between moving between like +1 to -1 if we set the norm at 0 to the norm at like 5. So decline in volatility not only implies a decline of like rate of recession, which I can show if you want, but also it implies a general decline of
You
volatility
cannot
from year
test
to
that.
year.
You cannot actually test that. Like
Do
by
you-
your own metrics, you don't really.
I'm going to be honest here. Have you taken a single stats course in your life?
Well, I'm supposed to take one next year, but like
Okay,
really now.
please do, and then tell me that you can't test this, okay?
Okay.
Wake up, liberal.
I don't know how else to engage this. You can test this. We've tested it, and I showed you a study testing it.
Wake up, liberal.
You showed me graphs of like 3 stagnating countries and one going down and one going up. Come on.
Yes, and
Didn't
6
you
out of
show
the
me
7
anything
support my theory.
Wake up,
Yeah, 6
liberal.
of 7.
I love you.
Well, stagnating isn't really decreasing. That's
So
one.
if the rate of profit is falling, and you think falling rate of profit leads to increased volatility and increased rates of recession, then we should expect that most of them are going to be seeing increased volatility. Instead, 6 of 7 see decreasing volatility.
Well, yeah, I don't really believe the link between them, you know?
You just said that declining rate of profit, not just said, like you consistently have been saying that declining rate of profit leads to more recessions, more crises, right?
Yes, I don't believe in the link between volatility and crisis.
Why? Why would you think these are separate? They're literally just the same thing, but a different starting
because
point.
throughout history we have seen more the crisis than we did before, which would go against what you're trying to test.
Okay, so in the period since the 1960s, we've had, I think, 4, 5 economic recessions in the United States. In the period
Since the
before, go ahead.
Yeah.
In the period before, we had one about like every 5 to 10 years. Like,
Well,
the rate has declined. You can literally at this one, just look at a graph and see it. You don't even need to do formal empirical tests to see it. I wish I were memeing
but,
about
like,
this.
It increased in the 2000s, and that didn't happen. It like in the 2000s it was the same as the 70s, and in the 2000s it was more.
Why
than
would
the
we
60s.
only look at one decade of an entire time period?
I looked at 3 actually, 70s, 60s, and 2000.
Yeah. So, look, chat. If you're looking at the graph that I've showed, the gray areas are areas where there are recessions. I want you to tell me whether there have been more or less gray areas since the Great Depression, or since like the what we would call like the Keynesian period starting in the 1950s. Like,
Wake up, liberal. I love you.
the answer should be obvious. I can send the same graph here, but it doesn't matter how you want to define it.
Well, I hope you understand how correlation works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean, you haven't taken the stats class, so I don't think you could define it. What a terrible comeback.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so now I'm not trying to be condescending. I'm saying that like the models here that you propose are literally rejection of empirical evidence. So I don't know how else to engage with this other than to like show you that the empirical evidence shows the opposite of what you suppose. So why should we support the model which predicts things opposite of reality?
Well, that's the thing. I don't really believe in this nonsense. I don't think that what you're saying is true.
Okay, what would I have to do to convince you? What evidence? Here, let's do the classic Popperian thing, since you think I'm a Popperian. What evidence, if I showed you, could make you change your belief about this?
Wake up,
Well, I
liberal.
think that
Hello?
if you can't really come up with counter evidence that exists to the one that I told you about.
Okay.
That, you know, that
Wake up, liberal.
So no evidence is possible? Literally no evidence could change this belief?
well, unless you disprove my evidence that the rate of profit does cause a crisis, then yes, and show me counter evidence, then yes, I will. That will be sufficient.
What evidence? What evidence has there been for the link between the? Are you just going to point to like the Kleeman evidence, which is that like, hey, we think that this has led to increased financialization, and increased financialization led to a crisis? Is that literally the entire link?
Well, no, actually, he goes much deeper into this, and you should read the book for yourself to know.
So I haven't read Kleeman's book. I've read like 5, 6 of Kleeman's articles. Why should I believe that why can't we just look at the fucking evidence if it's so simple?
Like, you're just pointing me to like the same thing, and I'm telling you, like, it doesn't really map out in reality. Okay.
I don't think you can point to reality when I've shown like many, many, many more studies showing the exact opposite of what you're claiming.
It could be many other things. It could be that capitalists gotten better. It could be that that capitalists open new markets. It could be many other things that has nothing to do with like what you're describing here.
Sure. So it could be
Like,
the capitalists are constantly opening.
Don't like describe a whole phenomena of volatility when I don't know anything about it, and expect me to just buy your claims because you have some graph showing.
Sure, I'd be happy to walk you through. So like, for example, on the GDP graph that I sent you, you can literally just, if you read the article, Blanchard 2001, it will explain to you what volatility means.
Yeah, so like, I don't really understand what's the difference between me and you. Like, I point you to like a book and you point me to another book. It's really a very unproductive debate.
Well, so the difference is I can point you to the book and I can explain its methodology and I can like show you why those outcomes are real. And the only thing that you pointed to is, hey, we think that rate of profit led to increased financialization, and we think that led to one crisis.
Well, it did, and
that's one. Even if this is true, it's one data point.
Yeah.
The whole point is that we shouldn't look at anecdotes. We should look at like the entire trend of history. So the
anecdotes,
trend.
I did not point to anecdotes. If you don't believe that financialization investment in financialization increased, then I don't really know what to tell you. But like, it did.
Okay, let's say that it did. But if it hasn't led to an apparent increase of the rate of crisis, which is, we also have studies measuring whether the great moderation has continued after 2008. And while there's like disagreement, I think
moderation, there's great. I don't really believe this, man.
Okay. I mean,
yeah.
Okay. Why?
Well, I told you why. I don't think that it maps correctly into reality.
Okay, so you think that we live in a less stable economic system
that have nothing to do with what you're describing.
Okay.
I'm actually getting really tired in this debate. When is this going to be over?
Whenever you want, my dude.
Yeah. Like, we were supposed to talk about the law of value, but you did none of that because you kept trying to make the same point about empiricism over and over.
Well, I mean, at first we talked about the falling rate of profit, literally just because you mentioned that one first. So if you want, we can talk about the labor theory of value now.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So the same one there. The labor theory of value makes an assertion that there's an objective value of any given good. This is the sort of thing that would be nice to have empirical evidence for.
No. Please don't say objective value. First of all, this just shows that you have not read the chapter 1 of Marx, where he says that literally value is a social relation that is realized in exchange.
Okay. Do you believe in TSSI or do you believe in the Scheich-Cockshott interpretation?
Wake up, liberal.
Well, I believe in whatever Marx wrote, really. I don't subscribe to any school.
Okay. So how do you solve the transformation problem?
Well, I think that Kleiman had the right idea about it.
Okay, so Kleiman is TSSI.
Yeah, sure. But like, I don't really subscribe to all of their beliefs. I don't really like to label myself, you know. I don't like this form of dogmatism. Yeah.
Okay, so what evidence do you think suggests the strength of the labor theory of value from the TSSI school?
Well, the thing is, this directly contradicts what Marx says. Marx doesn't think that value is an empirical fact. Marx says that value is like a mental conclusion. It's a logical conclusion. It literally needs no.
So then, does labor theory of value?
If you think two things can be exchanged, that means that there must be a property in common to them, and this property must be quantifiable.
Sure. So there's one thing that you can exchange in this economy for any good. It's money. So there should be some relation between that commodity and every good. Now, Marx has an assertion, if you believe in like the Scheich-Cockshott interpretation, that the median, like the objective value of a good underneath like all the supply and demand fluctuations is the like average amount of labor time that goes into like a given good. So what is the empirical prediction of the labor theory of value that the TSSI or Kleiman would make? How do we know if labor theory of value is true?
Well, first of all, what you have said does not actually represent what Marx says at all. For starters, Marx, when he says that the exchange of commodities at their value or approximately at their
Wake
value
up,
thus
liberal.
requires a much lower
Hello?
stage than their exchange at their prices of production, which requires a definite level of capitalist development apart from the domination of price and price movement by the law of value. He says this when he's comparing himself to Adam Smith and Ricardo. Marx does not believe that that prices sell at their around the same value. That's incorrect. Marx believes in prices of production. Marx says in 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 volume 3, in chapter 3 of volume 1, he says that price and value form an incongruity, that if they were ever to be equal, it would seem accidental. What you're describing, and it just again shows that you have never actually read a single page of Marx in your life, is that Marx believes in the labor theory of price, which isn't true. Cockshot has been described by many
Wake
contemporary
up,
Marxists
liberal.
as a neo-Ricardian,
Hello?
and he is, because that's what Ricardo and Smith believes in,
Okay,
that
sure.
in a labor
So
theory
now
of
we've
price.
said what
But
Marx
Marx does not believe in this. Marx believes that total price is equal to total value, and marginalists actually agree that total price in the end equal total value.
Okay, then how, if as you say, the prediction is the same, how do we know that labor theory value is true? If there's no difference in predictions, according to you.
No difference in what predictions?
You just said that total price is equal to total value in both subjectivist and labor theory value positions.
True. Yeah.
So, okay, so then how do we know which one's true?
Well, what do you mean?
If they both make
Well,
the
that's
same
not the only
prediction.
assertion they make. I'm just saying that this is a well-accepted assertion, right?
Okay, so then
Like
what I tried to ask is,
I wouldn't
how do
judge
we know?
which one is true.
So I asked,
Yeah.
how do we know that labor theory value is true? And so all that we've known is apparently what Marx doesn't believe, and that in this one prediction, there's no way to test labor theory value. So how do we know that labor theory value is true? What leads us to believe it?
well, yeah, because you're just going to reduce everything to empiricism, meanwhile ignoring the actual arguments made for it. You know, it's
So
really very laughable.
okay, so then this argument is also just going to be one where we don't actually use any evidence about the real world, and you just like base an argument about a common sense observation. That's it.
Well, they're not more than common sense observation. You know, I don't know why you reject logic when it's like accepted by like everyone.
Sure, because
But
social,
yeah.
because as I just said, social systems usually involve hundreds of thousands of variables. So to think that a model, which only starts with some
Yes,
observations,
but if you talk about only very specific variables such as the sphere of production or the sphere of exchange, these
yeah, there's still
variables tend
hundreds of
to
thousands
like
of value.
repeat.
What?
1,000 variable. You're just talking about like an imaginary magnitude. Like you can never really actually represent this in a concrete
Yeah,
language.
you.
Like what do you mean 1,000 variables? Like I think that you know, if you're going to you can abstract departments into departments of production. Like there are many departments, but like you can abstract them into two: one that makes the means of
Wake up,
production and one that
liberal.
makes the means of
Hello?
consumption. And abstractions can like apply to many things, and you can make general assumptions about them. It's not really something that is odd, you know.
Okay, so we can make abstractions. The question is always which abstractions are correct. That's the whole idea of making a model. Labor theory value
I
is a
think that
model of the world. So is a subjectivist model. They're all models of how we think we can fit all of those hundreds of thousands of variables into just a few, just like something that we can hold in our hand, hold in our head. That's the whole point of modeling, right? So how do we know that our model fits the world? That's the whole reason we test things. If all you're saying is that you make observations and then you drive a model from them and you just assume that model is true because there's like a logical process there, this doesn't necessarily prove that you've chosen the correct observations. That's the basic problem.
Yeah, okay. I think that we're just not going to agree on this at all. I think you're just not going to accept any logical argumentation, and we should just end this debate.
I, I mean, sure, because like I don't think that you can use logical argumentation to prove something about the economy or other social systems because humans are incredibly complicated. Simple as.
Well, humans are incredibly complicated, but when it comes to the economic sphere, there is only labor and there is only capital or rent. Like you can make a huge general statement about humans, but when it comes to the economy, it gets really simple. Anyways, I think that this conversation have long exhausted itself. Goodbye.
Okay. Would you like to tell us who you are, what you do, and where people can find you again?
Well, I am on Twitter. My @ is @himyawi1, HM and Yawi1. Bye.
See ya. Post their Twitter link and their boyfriend's Twitter link. Sure. So mandatory post-conversation recap. People who don't believe that empirics should determine how your economic models work are generally really, really dumb. You should think that scientific realism is useful. You should think that the only way that you can figure out where their model is correct or not is if it lines up with like what we can observe about reality. And it turns out you can't just do that by observing things at the start and then concluding a million things from them. You actually have to make testable predictions and know whether they line up with reality. If you reject that, then you have no fundamental way of knowing whether your theory is true or false. I understand that like a lot of people seem to be very mad about this, but the basic reason why you should believe in scientific realism is the very fact that you're able to observe this at this given moment. The fact that science is so able to accurately predict the interaction between this computer and like some satellite and then your computer is a testament to the fact that testing empirical predictions is one of the best ways to make sure that our theories actually apply to the real world. It's that simple. This is not like
Wake up, liberal.
if I'm going to appeal to anything, right, like the theories of like rejecting realism about like the external world are incredibly rare among actual philosophers. It's like 85% of people are realists about the world, about the external world, and scientific realists are also like 80%. There are some philosophers who will disagree with you. These are not like controversial positions. Generally, most philosophers tend to agree with the position that I'm supporting here. This is not an argument necessarily for them. Consensus is not on its own an argument, but it's generally an argument that these positions are not the ones that need defense. Instead, it's the positions that are less likely that probably need more defense. So I think that like if you want to come out here and say that, hey, I think I can model how social systems work just because I've made a few observations and then derive things from that, you need to be the one who is willing to defend that.